All right. We're talking today with Don Holthausen of Raritan, New Jersey. The interviewer is James Smither of the Grand Valley State University Veterans History Project. This is a reshoot of an interview that he had done about a decade ago, and we'll provide a little bit more detail in a number of places. So I encourage anyone interested to watch both of them. All right. So let's begin at the beginning. Where and when were you born?
I was born in South Amboy, New Jersey in 1949.
Okay. And did you grow up in that area?
Yes, I grew up in Sayreville, New Jersey, which was very close to there. And at 4 years old, my parents moved to Bridgewater, which put my dad much closer to work. He had 40-some years with American Cyanamid in Boundbrook. And we lived in Bridgewater until 1967, when I graduated high school and my parents relocated to White House, New Jersey.
Okay. All right. And then did you have brothers and sisters?
I do have one brother. I have one brother that's 3 years younger, and he was never in the military. Actually, the military went to the number system, the lottery system, and I believe my brother ended up with he had like number 350 something, so he got very lucky there.
Right. Okay. Now, what did you do after high school?
After high school, I served at a machinist apprenticeship, and I was a machinist for 2 or 3 different companies, and then my final one of Johnson & Johnson. I had 22 years with Johnson & Johnson as a machinist, machine builder, and machine design. Later on, even machine design and machine building. And then my last 10 years, I took a job with a chemical company just as facilities maintenance.
Okay. All right. So let's back up now to that period right after high school. So were you working as a machinist when you went to the military?
Yes, I was. Yes, I was when I got my draft notice. Yeah.
Yeah. And when did you get the draft notice?
I was 20 years old. I'm sorry. No, it was before that. I was 19 years old. I got my draft notice in March or April, and my birthday's in April the 6th. And I had a report to the draft board in June of that year.
Okay, so are we now in June of 68?
1969.
69.
June of
Okay.
1969,
Okay.
I was drafted.
All right. And then where do you go for basic? I guess before that, did you have a draft physical first?
I did. Yes, I had that, and I got drafted at the draft board in Newark, New Jersey. Mm-hmm. We got back on the bus and went down to Fort Dix. I served basic training at Fort Dix.
Okay. I was actually going to ask, though, when you had the physical, did that seem to be a serious process, or were they...
No, it went pretty fast. They got everybody through there pretty fast. They had doctors, one doctor looked at ears, one doctor looked at, or maybe the doctor was nose, throat, and ears. Mm-hmm. Another doctor did a lung x-ray, and it went pretty fast. I really don't think it took much more than a half an hour.
Did you notice anybody trying to scam the system or find a way to not get drafted?
No, not really.
Okay.
No, I do remember at the draft board in Newark, they called off all our names, and they said, if your name's called, get against this wall on this side of the room. And then they called off another 16 or 18 names, and they told those young men, get against this wall. And I'm thinking, oh, what's this all about? And then the 16 or 18 guys says, why aren't we with them? And somebody said, they're going to Fort Dix, you're going in the Marine Corps. So those 16 or 18 guys got drafted into the Marine Corps. Some of them started crying. They were very, very upset. A lot of them guys were very upset about it. They would much rather go to Fort Dix, I think, than Camp Lejeune.
Mm-hmm. Well, and some of it might be that they were afraid that if they were Marines, they were that much more likely to get killed.
That could be. Very possibly. Okay. Very possibly, yeah.
Okay. All right. So did you go to Fort Dix then for basic?
I did. Basic at Fort Dix. And then I had a 30-day leave, and I went to Fort Lewis, Washington for advanced infantry training.
All right. Now, again, I want to back you up a little bit. People watching this are mostly not going to be people who've ever been in the military. So they don't have any idea really what basic training consisted of. So what was basic like for you? What happens to you when you get to Fort Dix?
Basic was a lot of physical training. We ran a couple miles before breakfast every morning. A lot of guys couldn't keep up with that, and I believe there was 1 or 2 guys that got recycled into a second basic training to see if they were able to run that far. I'll tell you a funny story. Our last day of basic training, right before we graduated, we were told what our MOS was going to be. and myself and 7 or 8 guys were 11 Bravo. And my drill sergeant said, Holthausen, if you learned how to polish your shoes, maybe you wouldn't be 11 Bravo. If you learned how to polish your boots. Back then you did all your PT in combat boots. I understand today in basic training they're allowed to use sneakers for PT.
Yeah. Now, explain for the outside audience, what's an 11 Bravo?
11 Bravo, that's small arms infantry MOS.
Yeah.
And if you have 11 Bravo or 11 Charlie, which is mortars, small arms infantry or mortars, you're definitely infantry.
Mm-hmm.
You're a foot soldier.
All right. Now, while you were in basic, how did they manage discipline?
Oh, they were pretty strict. They were very strict. They inspected the barracks every day. When you made your bed in the morning, the drill instructor had to see a quarter bounce off the blankets had to be tucked so tight that he could bounce a quarter off it. I remember one guy got caught with some potato chips or a bag of snacks in his foot locker, and he ended up doing pots and pans in the mess hall for a week on account of that. So yeah, they were very strict with us. It wasn't until I think our last month of basic training where we started getting weekend passes.
Mm-hmm.
If you were doing okay, you got a weekend pass to go home, which was convenient for me. I was an hour ride from Fort Dix.
Okay. Now, were there guys who, I guess, really screwed up or tried to challenge the sergeants or anything like that? Or did you all just kind of stay in line?
No, I pretty much was. Yeah, and I think most of the guys in basic training and AIT, most everybody stayed pretty much in line.
Okay. All right. And then how long was basic?
It was 8 or 10 weeks, I believe. 2 months or slightly more than 2 months.
Right. Yeah, eight was pretty much standard at that time.
Yeah, yep.
Okay. And then now where do you go for AIT?
Yeah, I had a 30-day leave, and then I had orders for AIT at Fort Lewis, Washington.
Okay.
And halfway through Fort Lewis, it rained a lot out there. I guess some people say Fort Lewis almost had their own monsoon season, which it seemed like, because I think it was the last half of AIT. We had a lot of rainy weather, but still, you were out there doing PT and training in the rain with a poncho on. That part of Washington was very pretty because we were out. So long as you're outside training, you always have Mount Rainier.
Mm-hmm.
You got to view Mount Rainier there in the distance. It was only 30-some miles away.
Right. To what extent was that training geared for Vietnam?
Advanced infantry training, yeah, a lot of it was escape and evasion, and a lot more weapons training. There was much more weapons training involved, and night patrols, compass reading, map reading. They wanted to get you totally ready, so you know.
And did they try to tell you anything about Vietnam itself?
Yes, they did. They had some instructors that were back from Vietnam, and they sort of told us what to look out for. Now a lot of bungee pits and stuff like that was lowlands. We didn't run into that up in the mountains around Ripcord or the Ashua Valley. I guess fighting in the lowlands was a lot different. Same with down south. Some of these instructors were down south, maybe more towards.
Saigon,
that area, or down,
or in the Delta below that.
Yes, I had a cousin. I had a cousin and a good friend that were in the Navy, and they were on the river boats down in the Delta, and they came under hostile fire quite a bit also.
Yeah. All right. Now, when you had gone home on leave before AIT, you were expecting to go to Vietnam, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And how did your family respond to that?
I'm sure they were very, very worried at the time. I had an uncle that served. He was infantry in World War II. He was in the South Pacific, and in fact, he was there for 3.5 years. It was no like we were in Vietnam for 12 years and you got recycled home. World War II guys were out there. Some of them 3.5 years. And I remember before I went over, my uncle said, "Keep your head down. Always make sure you got a rock or a tree or something to hide behind, and don't do anything stupid." So, good advice.
Mm-hmm.
Good advice.
All right. And how much did you know about the Vietnam War before you went over?
Very little, very little. I didn't follow the news much.
All right. So you finish AIT, and now how do they get you to Vietnam?
We had a report. I think we might have had a 1 or 2 weeks off, and then I had a report. Oh yeah, I had a report to Fort Lewis, Washington, because we flew out of. I checked into Fort Lewis again, and we flew out of McCord Air Force Base. We had a flight over, which was really interesting. It was November. We left McCord in November, so we were wearing field jackets, and then. The plane, we flew over the top, we flew over Alaska, because I remember we refueled in Anchorage, and we got out at Anchorage, and they said you could go into the airport, but you had to be back on the plane in a half an hour if you wanted to go in and buy a snack or have a burger, but make sure you're back on a plane in a half an hour. And it was about 28 degrees and snowing. And anyway, we reboarded. Plane took off again, and a lot of the guys, it was a long trip, so we slept a lot. You're flying through different time zones, so you'd see the sun come up 4 hours later, 5 hours later, you'd see the sun go down. And 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, they said, okay, we're going to land in Tokyo. We're landing in Tokyo to refuel again. You won't need your field jackets. It's 80. It took 3 o'clock in the morning. It was still at like 88 or 90 degrees at the airport. Very, very hot and muggy. I'm like, wow, the last stop it was snowing, and here it is, almost 90 degrees at 3 in the morning. But anyway, it was an adventure, that's for sure.
Mm-hmm. All right. Now, so you could get off the plane in Tokyo again for a little while?
We did, yes. Again, they let us go in the airport for a half hour or 45 minutes.
Mm-hmm. And then, is Vietnam your next stop?
We flew into Saigon. I believe it was Ton Son Nhut, and they held us at that area around Ton Son Nhut. I pulled guard duty down there for a week, maybe a week or 9 or 10 days, and pretty much during the day you could do what you wanted to do, but nighttime you had bunker duty around the airport and around the bases. But after about a week of that, they said, okay, we're cutting orders for you. You're going up to I Corps with the 101st. And then I joined the 101st Airborne at it was either Fire Base Birmingham. I believe it was Fire Base Birmingham. The guys just got back from the DMZ, and they were on Bastogne in Birmingham, I think, in November.
Okay, so you're
very muddy, rainy. They brought us a Thanksgiving meal out to Birmingham.
Okay. To back up a little bit, how did they get you from Ton Son Nhut up to that fire base?
C-130, a C-130, and the pilot started the engine, and the other engine he cranked over and was like, whoa, 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 whoa. And then we're watching out the window, and somebody brought a battery charger out, hooked a battery charger on it, and they started the second engine, and I'm like, wow, this is going to be a good flight. But it was a piston plane,
Mm-hmm.
a prop. It was a prop plane. I think a C-130.
Yeah, quite like it.
Yeah, and that's how we flew up to Da Nang. We flew up to Da Nang and then trucked. I think from there was trucked to Camp Evans.
Mm-hmm. And then from Evans out to Birmingham, did you take a helicopter? Or?
Helicopter. Yes, I believe it was a helicopter flight.
Okay.
You know what? I'm fuzzy on that now. Now I'm not sure if it was a truck ride or a helicopter. Again, I think it was that was the monsoon season.
Mm-hmm.
It was wet and muddy. I know during the monsoon the choppers didn't fly every day. A lot of times they were socked in, especially when we were up in the mountains.
Yeah, not sure how good the roads would have been either, at least, because Birmingham that's up in the hills a little bit.
It was, yes. And I remember the truck where the trucks were going in and out. You had to stay in the truck. If you got out of the truck tracks, the mud was actually a foot deep. It was deeper than your boots. So you pretty much had to follow where the trucks were going to get up to where Charlie Company was at the time.
Now, did you get any kind of training from the division before you go in the field? Because some guys talk about having gone through a screening Eagles training thing. the CERTS training?
If we did, I don't remember that.
Yeah. All right. So now you're up at Birmingham. So describe what that's like.
Wet and muddy. But again, on a fire base, the guys just pull security at nighttime on the perimeter, and then during the daytime you take care of your gear, make sure your weapons clean and dry. And
All right. Now, what unit were you assigned to at this point?
Charlie, I was with Charlie Company the whole time.
Okay, so 2nd Battalion, 506th Regiment.
Yes. Yep.
Okay, so and now would you go out on patrol at all, or did you just stay on the fire base?
No, we stayed inside the perimeter of Birmingham the whole time.
Okay. And did you take any incoming while you were there? Anyone shoot at you?
I don't remember any. No, I don't remember any. It was again during the monsoon season. Everything quieted down.
Mm-hmm.
I think maybe a lot of the enemy went back to Hanoi or something.
Okay. So you were out there for Thanksgiving, and they fly you in?
Yeah, they flew a nice turkey meal out to us. Yeah, we got hot chow. I think that happened again at Christmas time.
Okay, so you were still out there at Christmas.
Christmas time we were in the lowlands.
Okay.
Christmas time we were working the lowlands, small patrols and stuff. The company got allocation. The company got eight allocations to go see the Bob Hope show. So we drew high card. I won. We drew high card again. I drew high card about 3 or 4 times until I was one of the 8. And I got to go to the Bob Hope show. So a chopper came in and picked up eight of us. We went back to Evans, had a hot meal. Then we went to the Bob Hope show, and then the next day flew back out to the field. So that was a treat. That was a real treat.
Yeah. What was the Bob Hope show like?
Yeah, it was great. He had some other celebrities. He had a lot of young ladies with him. Singers, and a dance team. Trying to think who else was there. There's another actress. She's getting pretty old now. I forget her name. The funny thing, the following year I was home watching the Bob Hope show on television, and they panned in 2 or 3 rows in front of us. One of the GIs had a little pet monkey, and I'm sitting home the following year watching that on TV, and he was three rows in front, but they panned in on him and the monkey. And I says we're right behind him, but we were cut off at the waist, so we didn't get. But yeah, the Bob Hope show was really good.
Okay. Now, at this point, who was your company commander?
Captain Hale. At Birmingham, it was still Captain Hale. And when Captain Hale left, I believe that's when Captain Vasquez came in.
Okay, so would that have been January, February?
I believe so, yeah, around January or February, I think Captain Vasquez took over.
Okay. And then who was your platoon leader when you got there?
Bob Wallace.
Okay. What was he like?
He was a great guy. He was a great guy. He took very good care of us. He got, his radio handle was Gypsy because, I don't know if you heard this story, when we were in January, February, when we were in the lowlands, Lucas, was it General Lucas?
Colonel
Lucas was flying around in a helicopter, and it was monsoon season. We all had our poncho halves tied together in shelters, and he goes, Wallace, take down all them poncho liners. It looks like a gypsy camp down there, and ever since then, Wallace's handle became Gypsy.
Mm-hmm. All right. And talk a little bit about Vasquez. What sort of officer was he?
What was
Talk about Vasquez.
Oh, he was very strict. He was very strict with the guys, but only because he didn't want to see anybody hurt. And he drummed into us. When you're out in the bush walking, you keep like 6 or 10 yards apart from each other. You know, in case an RPG or somebody throws a grenade, or the casualties are minimum. As to where if there's 5 or 6 guys all together and an RPG comes in, and now the enemy killed 5 of us. So he was always like break up the cluster. You know, he didn't want to see anybody in clusters, which was all good training. It was all common sense. But like again, he was very, very strict. You know, he was in the Korean War.
Mm-hmm.
He saw all this stuff before, and he was the best SEAL we had. He saved a lot of lives, even when he wasn't with us anymore. He saved a lot of lives from what he trained us. I give him a lot of credit. I was sorry to see he passed away last year.
Yeah, I fortunately had the chance to interview him, so we have an interview with him.
That's great.
Very first year I did it. Yeah, so and he really is something.
That's terrific.
Okay, so he's your commander now, and then you're patrolling the lowlands for a while, and then starting in March, the beginnings of what becomes the whole Ripcord operation starts, and so. After patrolling in the lowlands, then at what point do you start going back into the hills?
I believe it was March or April.
Yeah.
March or April. We patrolled. They dropped us in below Ripcord. They dropped us in below Ripcord, and that's when Goodson got killed. Goodson got killed on my birthday, April the 6th.
Okay.
And that was probably the first enemy contact, and I believe that was a day or two before we finally went up on Ripcord.
Okay. And who was Goodson?
He was in our platoon. He was a really good guy. He got wounded. Somebody else got. There was one or two other guys got killed. Several wounded. I remember the medevac the medevac wouldn't fly that night, and the medic and I took turns holding a compression. The gauze pad, because he had a sucking chest wound. Besides he lost an eye, he had a sucking chest wound, and we held that gauze pad with Vaseline and stuff to seal it up so he could breathe.
Yeah.
And I kept telling him, "You're getting out of first light. You're going to be medevac. You'll be okay. Be okay." And he was talking to me the whole time. And for the next 30 years, I guess I prayed that he made it. And my first reunion I went to, I learned he passed away. He passed away. They got him out to the hospital ship, and I don't think he lived another hour or two. And I regret that. He was a good guy.
All right.
He wore a steel. He was from West Virginia, and I remember that because with a magic marker, he had that on a steel pot, West by God, Virginia.
All right. And that was your first real time under fire?
Yes, yeah. No, I'm sorry. When Steve Stanley got killed. Steve Stanley got killed in March, and that was on. We NDP'd right off an LZ, and we got ambushed by NVA, and Steve Stanley got killed.
All right. And now, were you just carrying an M16, or did you have a machine gun? Or?
I carried an M16 for a while. I carried an M79 grenade launcher for a while. I think the M16 was more effective. Although the M79 grenade launcher, we did have buckshot rounds for them. So in enemy contact, you could always load it up with a buckshot round. But it was one shot, then you had to reload. Yeah. One shot and reload.
All right. So Ripcord, they tried a couple of times to set up a base on Ripcord, once in March and then the 1st of April. And then your company eventually establishes the base. So talk about what happened then.
It was setting up. We had to put up a lot of concertina wire.
Okay. Well, how did you get to the hill to begin with?
Well, after the enemy contact, I guess it was a day or two later, we just marched up. I think they probably prepped it with artillery or jet strikes and stuff. And after a day or two, we just walked up there and we had no contact.
Yeah. Because previously they had used helicopters and they took incoming fire, and that's why they gave up. But you guys just walked up.
Yeah.
All right. So now talk about building the base. You concertina wire.
Yes. We had to put out a lot of concertina wire. We had to there was some bunkers already there from the last time it was a fire base, but we had to refurbish them and dig them out, put up new sandbags, the corrugated steel, the PSP. We'd lay down a couple layers of that. It's like a big, huge foxhole, but then we put down a couple layers of that and then 3 or 4 layers of sandbags on top of the PSP. So in case you did get mortar fire, you'd be safe in your bunker.
And then were you digging fighting positions?
Yeah, we were at a fighting position for quite a while. But then they started rotating companies off of that. I think at one point we'd go back out in the field and another company would come in and pull. I was very lucky. I met a guy from Hillsborough, New Jersey, John Tamburini, and he was with the 319 319th, or to the 105 battery. He was a battery sergeant with the 105. He was here in 2018. I don't know if you got to interview him. Did you?
Yeah.
But anyway, I saw Hillsborough, New Jersey on his helmet, and I says, we're neighbors. I live in Bridgewater, and well, actually White House at the time with my parents, and got talking to him, and I got to be friends with him. And every night that artillery battery got hot chow flown out from Camp Evans. And a lot of evenings, John Tamburino would walk over to my side of the hill and he'd yell down, Don, come up here. I need a hand up here. Come on up to the top of the hill. And I'd walk up and talk to him and he'd say, get in my chow line over here. So a lot of times I'd hop in his chow line instead of eating sea rations. It was a big plus.
Okay. Now talk about patrolling, going out in the field there before the battles in July. But so if you're May, June, that period.
During the monsoon season, there was hardly any enemy contact. I think one of our platoons made contact, and then again when Steve Stanley got killed. But I think we pretty much went from January to March with no contact at all.
But then in April you go up, you establish Ripcord, but then after that you go back down again.
Yeah, and then we started, and then we started getting enemy contact, and it was the end of the monsoon season, the weather was better, and I think that's when the NVA started infiltrating that area much more. I read Captain Vasquez's book, and I'm not sure if it was Captain Vasquez or General Harrison wrote a book also. It might have been General Harrison's book.
Yeah.
And he said we were outnumbered. We were probably outnumbered 12 or 13 to 1. And I could believe that. I could believe that by the amount of enemy in the area by June and July.
Okay. Now in June, were you making much contact, or could you just tell they were out there?
Yeah, John Fowler. John Fowler got. There was another fellow too. I forget his name. At my age, I get foggy with a lot of this. But yeah, we were out on a patrol, and them guys walked up. The enemy found a claymore mine and set it up on the trail, and a couple guys got hit pretty bad with that claymore. And we ended up medevacing them.
But you weren't really coming under fire.
Not too much. No, not too much.
All right. Now, when you were patrolling at that point in May and June, would you patrol as a whole company or in platoons?
Pretty much. Sometimes we'd move as a company, and then a lot of times we would just move as a platoon. But we started finding enemy commo wire out there, and they fired. I think some of the guys followed the commo wire and actually found a cache of weapons and stuff. So we knew there was enemy in the area. And also, one night they called us on the radio. They confirmed twice. Headquarters called to confirm our position, and then they told us there's going to be a B-52 strike tonight, like 2 o'clock in the morning, and it's going to be. This was a couple kilometers away from us, but again, they 2 or 3 times they had to verify our position. You know, you sure that's your coordinates, and. Sure enough, 2 o'clock in the morning, it was loud, very loud, and it was like an earthquake. It was like living through an earthquake at the same time, with all the noise, even at 2 kilometers away. A B-52 strike is enormous. We hiked over there the next day, and it was probably 100 yards wide and probably a quarter mile long. There was no jungle. It was right down to dirt and debris, dirt and rock. Very devastating.
And could you tell if there had been any North Vietnamese there?
I think that was a reason for it, but I don't remember finding any sign of enemy. But I believe that's why there was a drop there.
Yeah. Okay. Now, somewhere along the line, you also changed company commanders.
Yeah. After Vasquez, is that when we got Captain Hewitt?
Yes.
Okay. And he was Captain Hewitt was. Somebody told me he was attached to Arvin unit. Maybe that's where he picked up his bad hammock habits and stuff. But
what was he like as a person, as far as you could tell?
He was friendly with everybody. He was a good guy. He certainly shouldn't have been in a hammock under the situation on 902. But
okay. So again, if people are watching this and they haven't seen your other interview or other guys and so
Well,
forth, let's talk a little bit about the whole Hill 902 situation. So right at the beginning of July, so about the 1st of July, so how do you wind up on Hill 902 and what are you doing there?
Well, because because Ripcord was taking the mortar fire, so I guess we were up on 902 to find out where the mortar fire was coming from.
Okay. And about how close was 902 to Ripcord?
Not far at all. I think I'd have to look at a map, but I believe it was less than a mile.
So you could see Ripcord easily and you could watch everything?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. When I called Camp Evans the night we were hit, Camp Evans said, we just got a report from Ripcord, possibly everybody's dead on 902.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it lit up. They said it lit up like the 4th of July.
Okay. So you go up there, and now do you find the mortar positions or?
There was foxholes. Yes, somebody spent time on 902 because a lot of the foxholes we just had to dig them out.
Mm-hmm.
They were already dug, so we dug them, which isn't really smart to do because the enemy knew where they all were too.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So sometimes digging out an old foxhole is not the right thing to do.
Okay. But you go up there on one day, and then did you observe the enemy mortar position?
Yeah, the first day when they brought us the law rockets and we were firing at the mortar tube right down in the valley between us and Ripcord.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, and so did you come up on one day and see that? So you stayed overnight, and then you're there. You stay there during the day the next day. Was that when you were shooting at the mortar position?
You know, I believe it was.
Yeah.
I believe it was.
That is what the other story said.
I believe it was.
Okay, so you do that. All right. And then what was the normal thing to do when you're out in the field in terms of how long you stay places?
Well, especially with firing the law rockets at that mortar tube. We were amazed. I mean, it was like maybe two or 3 hours before the sun was going down, and the senior guys were already talking to Hewitt. Which way are we going? Which way are we going to head out of here? And he's like, "Oh no, we're staying another night." And we're like, "No, you never do that." And he actually called battalion headquarters again and was told, "Stay there, stay there." And I didn't know this until I read this in Keith Nolan's book that. G2 or I don't. And anyway, they listen on enemy frequencies, and it was in eavesdropping on enemy frequencies. They knew we were going to get They knew we were going to get hit, and that information was never relayed to us from headquarters. So, I mean, I read that in Keith Nolan's book, but I was devastated when I read that.
Okay, so you've got at this point there's sort of 2 platoons of your company are there. The 3rd platoon is somewhere else. Okay. And so you're basically in positions around the top of the steep hill.
Right.
Okay. Then basically what happens then? How does the attack start?
I was on guard duty. I think I might have had midnight to 1. But I remember Steve Manthai relieved me. He relieved me, and I fell back asleep. I fell back asleep again, and I don't think it seemed like I didn't sleep 5 minutes. And Steve was grabbing my boot. He grabbed my boot and shook my boot. He said, "Don, get over here in the foxhole." And I grabbed my rifle and I jumped in the foxhole, and I'm like, what's going on? And I thought I was due for another guard duty or something. And he goes, no. He goes, they cited somebody heard something outside the perimeter.
Right.
And it wasn't a minute after that. Everything lit up. They hit us.
Okay. And you mentioned Captain Hewitt and the hammock. What was that about?
He was sleeping in the hammock both nights up there. And I don't know why the senior. I heard later on at the reunions, people said that they tried to talk him out of sleeping in a hammock. I heard that secondhand. I didn't hear that myself.
Yeah.
I can tell you something though. When he got wounded, his last words were, "Tell Diane I love her." He was in agony. I don't know. I think his legs were blown off, and he says, "Tell Diane I love her." And I tried for the longest time. I went to the VA in Somerville, veteran service officer in Somerville, and I wanted to know how I could get in touch with Diane Hewitt. They're like, that's private information, we won't tell you. And then I told Captain, I'm sorry, it was it Hewitt's brother?
Could be.
Captain Hewitt's brother, I believe, was at one of the reunions.
Well, his wife came, I believe, last year.
Yes, and I was told she's going to be here this time too.
Yeah.
So I could tell her that I could finally give her the message in person.
Mm-hmm.
But I believe I talked to Captain Hewitt's brother in 2018, and he told me he would relay the message to Diane.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, she's remarried and
Yeah.
everything.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Of course, you didn't see that happen. You were down in your hole on one side of the hill, and he was up.
I could hear him.
You could hear him.
I could hear his last words.
Wow. Okay, so you were that close.
Wasn't a big LZ. I don't believe the perimeter. I don't believe the perimeter was any more than 60 or 70 feet in diameter.
Okay. And so once the attack starts, then so you were in a hole. You were with Steve Manthide, all right, and that was the hole you said you had dug deeper.
Yeah. Oh yes. Yeah. We were expecting the worst. I remember Steve said, this isn't good. This isn't good. We would never stay in the same place 2 nights in a row. I mean, this is right out of the infantry field manual, you know?
Yeah.
You disappear, get lost.
Okay.
Hindsight's always 20/20.
All right. So now, does your position get attacked? What happens to you?
It was very confusing. I mean, you're taking small arms fire, RPGs, and then it wasn't a minute or two later. People said they're in the perimeter. I heard people yelling, "They're in the perimeter with us," and then Steve and I being in the same foxhole. Like one of us could watch inside, one of us could watch outside. Before we were drafted, Steve and I were both deer hunters. He was a Wisconsin deer hunter. I was a New Jersey, Pennsylvania deer hunter. And I kind of suspected no enemy was going to sneak up on us. I mean, we were ready. We were totally ready if anybody got near us. And fortunately, I didn't have to shoot into the perimeter. Like I said, at one point, I seen Steve bent over, and I got pushed to the side. And I said, "What's that?" He goes, "That was a satchel charge." And it wasn't 3 seconds after he threw it, it went off in front of us. But it was very hectic, very hectic. It seemed like hours, but probably after 10 or 15 minutes, it started to calm down. They dragged off. The next morning there was a lot of blood trails where they took their wounded and dead and pulled them back off the hill.
All right. Now,
a lot of them were dead up on the hill yet too.
Okay. Now, did you fire your M16 at all, or M79, whatever you had?
Yes, I did. I fired. Yeah. We fired. We kept putting down a fire, even though as steep as it was in front of us. We would put down a field of fire every couple minutes, especially if we heard something.
Mm-hmm. And did he fire into the perimeter? Did he have an?
No. I never had a fire into the perimeter. I was scared to do that.
All right. Did Steve do that, as far as you can tell?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I don't think
All right.
so.
Now, what else did you do while you were in that hole? Because you had radios.
Maybe pray.
You had radios.
Yes, I did. And it wasn't until the first 15 minutes it was probably too noisy with all the satchel charges and RPGs going off. And all the small arms fire, maybe the first 10 or 15 minutes it was too noisy. But as soon as it was a quell, as soon as it started to calm, as soon as the enemy fire started to quiet down, that's when I keyed the mic and I said, this is Charlie 1, is anybody there? And I had this conversation with Pete Maloro because he was the company clerk at Evans. And Pete said, "I don't think you got Charlie Company." He says, "I think headquarters." He says, "I think 2506 headquarters picked your call up." And when I asked for the gunship, they said, "Yeah, we can get them to you in a few minutes." And they said they said, "Listen, they'll be coming in on your frequency." And when we heard that whoop 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 whoop, it's a relief. It's a relief to have that kind of firepower. And a couple times we had Navy or the Air Force with the jets. A couple times the jets worked out for us too.
Okay, they did. You do remember jets coming?
No, not at 902. 902, okay. But other times. But other times, we had enemy. we were out there somewhere around Ripcord, and we saw enemy across the valley from us, like a mile away.
Yeah.
We saw a whole company of NVA regulars, and we called in a jet strike on them, and then walked over there 2 or 3 hours later and we didn't find not one body, not one blood trail, anything.
Mm-hmm.
I think they seen us, we saw them, and they knew they had to get out of there.
Right.
But I think the jets worked out for us that time,
Okay.
but not on 902.
Now, you were just too close to use jets, and they didn't have a clear.
That could be. That could be. Yeah, they didn't have a clear target, and they just.
So how did you wind up communicating with the helicopters? So the Cobras come in.
The Cobras came in, and they were on Charlie 1 frequency.
Right.
And like I say, I talk really loud when I get excited. I knew I didn't want to give away our position in the foxhole, so I said, Steve, here's the gunships, and that's when Steve already had the parachute flares, and he fired one over here, one over there, and that's when he told them to work out between the flares, and then if the flares are still burning, go perpendicular to your first run, and that's what they did.
So they are really firing very close to where you are.
Yeah, the Cobra gunships. I think it's like 24 rockets in each pod. So each one of them threw down 48 rockets plus the minigun. And I says, you know what? If the enemy's there, they're not there anymore.
Right. And how close were they firing to where you were?
50 or 100 yards in front of us.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Right. Probably closer to 50 yards in front of us.
Okay. And then did you call in any other kind of support?
John Conan. John Cunin?
Your Cannon, I think, is how you pronounce
Yes,
it.
he was 2nd platoon, and I only learned this. I didn't know this at the time. I learned this from I believe the 2017 or 2018 reunion. I had a conversation with John, and at the Charlie Company table, I says I thought we had the only working radio during that firefight, and John Coonan said no. He said, no, my 2nd platoon, I was 2nd platoon RTO, and he said, I called Ripcord for artillery support. And then it wasn't until 2018 when I was talking to the battalion surgeon. He goes, I'm over here, and he was a table away from us, but he says, I'm over here in your conversation about 902. And he says, do you mind me sitting down? He goes, I'd like to add a little. And he said there was so much confusion because artillery said we can't fire that close because the guns would have to almost be pointed straight up in the air. So he said finally after about 15 or 20 minutes it was given, the orders were given to the mortar company.
Mm-hmm.
And he said that's why there was a big lapse. He goes, you guys up on the hill probably thought it was 2 or 3 hours before you got illumination and mortar support. He said you probably thought it was 2 hours, but he goes it was a 15 or 20 minute delay from when John asked for it.
Mm-hmm.
So and like I say, I only learned that 5 or 6 years ago.
All right. And then, so you get illumination runs. Now, it was fairly close to dawn when the attack happened. I think they timed it, actually, till something like 3:30, 4:30 in the morning. So it wasn't too long before it begins to get light. And you said that things were already quieting down some by the time you were even going on the radio.
Yeah, the shooting and the RPGs and the gunfire and the satchel charges. There was much less of that.
Okay.
And you could see the guys inside the perimeter walking around, and as soon as an illumination flare would pop, they would get down.
Right.
They would get down. And then it burned out. They would start walking around again, either to find their way off, or if they were wounded, or maybe they still had satchel charges and they were going to try to throw them in some more foxholes. I remember one or two of the guys, when one or two of the enemy got shot, just standing there, and somebody says, "Hey, that's not one of us." And I know I think Bob Smoker got one of them.
Yeah. Okay. So and then as it starts to get light, now what happens?
We were in a state of shock. Was it Delta Company came in and they said we looked like a bunch of zombies. When they came in, 8 of them guys would get off the chopper and 8 of us would hop on and go. First we medevac the wounded. We medevac the wounded, And then as Delta Company came in to relieve us, I believe it was Delta Company. I'm not 100%.
Yeah, either Delta or Alpha, I think. But yeah.
But I'm not 100% on that. But when our relief came in, they said we looked like a bunch of zombies walking off and getting on. We were in shock. I was in shock. I never went through anything like that.
All right. Now you did not get wounded yourself there.
When I'll tell you what happened to me when Steve Stanley got killed, I got a piece of shrapnel in my arm, but I didn't have it taken out until I got back to Fort Wiley.
Right. But in the 902 fight, you didn't get hit.
No, not at all. No.
All right. So when they took out the dead and they took out the wounded, do you have a sense of how many men were still in your platoon?
No, I didn't. I knew we took a lot of casualties and we had a lot of wounded.
Okay.
We put a lot of wounded on the medevac, a lot of wounded, and then we got 7 or 8 body bags out there that we had to.
All right. Now, in the wake of that, now you've lost your company commander at this point. So who comes in now?
Oh, was it Jeff? I guess it was Jeff.
So Jeff Wilcox.
Yeah.
Okay. And what do you remember about him at the time? Because he wasn't there with you too long.
No, not long at all. Not long at all. I might have been introduced to him, but we had, 5 days later, we definitely had more dealings with him by Hill 1000. Got to know him a lot better. Got to know him a lot better at Hill 1000.
All right. So, and Hill, what was happening at Hill 1000? What was your company doing there?
The enemy was on the very top of the hill, and there was huge boulders up there. They were dug in really deep under the boulders. And they had a machine gun up there. We were supposed to go up there and take the machine gun out. But there was another company. There. They took wounded, and then we went up and we took casualties and wounded.
Because I guess the way the story is told, Delta Company had gone up and taken casualties,
right.
And they'd gone up one end of the hill, and your company was sent around to the other side of the hill to go up, and you were supposed to attack at the same time. Now,
I don't think that happened. I think did Delta Company hold back or something?
Some of them seem to have tried to go up, and that's and the question is sort of how many, what was going on. But were you even aware at the time?
No, I didn't. I wasn't even aware of that. But later, I heard it
right.
didn't happen simultaneously.
Okay. All right, and so basically, so you had to make your way through the jungle and then go up.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So as you get up to the top of the hill, what happens?
Oh, we were under small arms fire. The medic got killed. There was another fella, a big guy got killed.
Yeah.
And it took 2 of us to carry him. It took 2 of us to get his body back down.
How could you get? Because if he's out in the field of fire of the enemy machine gun or whatever, how could you get the body out?
We took turns. It's foggy. After 53 years, it's really foggy. But I remember there was a really big guy. He weighed more than I did, and we took turns. And again, I don't think he was dead. He might have just been wounded. But we took turns piggybacking him back down the hill, and.
Well, I guess once you get him out of the enemy field of fire, you can do that. I was just kind of wondering if he's lying out there in the open area.
I think they put down suppression fire. Okay. I think maybe for the first 50 yards they put down suppression fire, and they got him into a safer where the enemy couldn't see us anymore. And that's when me and another guy took turns carrying this heavy guy down.
Right. Yeah. Okay. And do you remember? Was it hot? Was the weather bad or?
I remember. No, I'm pretty sure. I'm pretty sure the sun was out.
Yeah.
I think so. I think it was a sunny day. Lucas was flying around.
Okay, so you're the battalion commander.
Observing. And after we got our dead and wounded back down, I remember Jeff. We told Jeff we need a napalm drop. Put a napalm because when we heard at 1300 hours, Lucas wanted us to go back up. We're going to do another assault at 1300 hours. And a bunch of the senior guys said, Jeff, tell Lucas to try to get us a napalm drop. Try to get a napalm drop up there. And because that would, a good napalm drop would suck the oxygen out of those bunkers. And somebody said, Lucas said, no, there's not time for that. No time for that. And that's when a lot of people started sitting on their steel pots and saying, you know what? I'm a draftee. I have no dog in this fight. I got a family at home, or I got a girlfriend at home, and it was pretty much over at that point. But, we got beat up that morning. We got beat up 5 days earlier on 902, and a lot of guys were just about ready to throw in the towel at that point. It's not the American way to do, but.
And do you remember what happened to Wilcox?
I heard he lost his commission.
Yeah. But he left your company at that point.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
That was sad. He was a good soldier.
Mm-hmm.
He even told Lucas, he says, if you want, I'll go up that hill by myself. I told Lucas, I'll go up that hill by myself if you want, if that's what you want.
Mm-hmm. But he wasn't going to take you with him.
I don't think, not many guys would go with him.
Well, he didn't want, I think that's what he told Lucas. He said, I'll go, but I can't take them.
Right, yeah.
Because he was a West Pointer, he signed up for it.
Right,
But yeah,
right.
okay. So you've kind of gotten through that. So now what happens to your company?
We were so under strength, we started getting a lot of, the first infantry was going home at the time, and we started getting guys that didn't have their 12 months in. We started getting a lot of first infantry guys in, and I just remember a whole lot of new people, in the company. And I went on July, August. Seems like August and September went pretty fast.
Yeah. Well, there's still July. I mean, the Ripcord campaign isn't over yet. So
Right,
Hill 1000 is about July 8th, and then the fire base gets evacuated on the 23rd. But in between, your company does come back into the area.
Yeah, and I think we were doing reconnaissance. I think we might have been doing reconnaissance in the area.
Okay. And there was also, though, a point when a company from another battalion, Delta 1506, came into the area, and they came under fire. They had to be rescued. And Charlie and Delta went out together to get them
To
out.
rescue them.
Do you remember that?
Not really. I'm foggy. I'm
Okay.
foggy on an awful lot of that stuff.
Okay.
From going to reunions for the last 10 or 15 years, I've learned a lot that I didn't even remember from back then. I got home. And got back in civilian life. I tried to put all this stuff out of my mind. I didn't even remember any of this. And it wasn't until Keith Nolan wrote the book. Keith Nolan's book came out, and one day I got a letter. I got a letter from Steve Manthei, and there was a picture of, I believe it was Steve and Tarbuck and myself and somebody else in the picture. And Steve had circled me, and he wrote on there, "Don, if this is you, call this phone number." So I called Steve up and had a nice conversation with him. He asked me, did you read the Ripcord book, Seize Your Fire Base Ripcord? And I says, no, I don't know anything about it. He goes, oh, go to a bookstore, go to Barnes & Noble and get a copy. And I started reading that, and I learned more from the Ripcord book than I remembered. Like I said, I just wanted all this out of my mind.
Right.
I got married. I had two kids, and I wanted to get on with my life. I didn't want to really remember any of this stuff.
Okay. So let's go back up again. So you get Ripcord shuts down at the end of July, and then how much longer are you in Vietnam after that?
I joined in November, and I was in Vietnam for 50 weeks. I got a 14-day early out, and my last 2 weeks I was back at Camp Evans pulling guard duty, bunker duty at Camp Evans. So I was out of the field 30 days before I went. No, I'm sorry, I got 14 days early out, and then 14 days before that, I arrived over there beginning in November. So I have to say pretty much the whole month of October I was out of the field.
Mm-hmm.
I was by the end of September I was out of the field.
Okay, all right. And then, what was life like on Camp Evans? I mean, you'd spent pretty much your whole time out in the field, and now you're back in a base camp.
Yeah, well, Camp Evans. Camp Evans during the day, you could do laundry, or you could go to. You had a hot meal. You had 3 hot meals at Camp Evans, but you had to go out to bunker duty. We'd pretty much sleep all morning long, and then I guess late afternoon, early evening, you had to go back out to the bunker guard. When it was light the next morning, you came back and took a nap and did laundry, did what you had to do, and but it was a much safer area at Evans.
All right. Now, one of the kind of standard things about Vietnam was that in the base camps, especially in the later part of the war, you had problems with racial issues and you had problems with drugs. Did you notice any of that yourself?
Yeah, you know what? I think I saw some marijuana when we went to Eagle Beach twice.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the guys might have had marijuana at Eagle Beach. I don't know where they got it from. Definitely not out in the field.
No.
There were definitely no drugs in the field. We were happy at Camp Evans because you get a couple cans of beer every day if you went to the club or whatever. And I remember one time they brought us somebody in the rear iced down a whole duffel bag full of beer, and it came out to the field, and the guys each got a can or two. That only happened one time, that didn't.
But on the base, you didn't really notice a whole lot of people using
Not
drugs.
too much, and you know what? I got along with everybody. I didn't see the racial discrimination. I didn't really witness too much of that.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. What we went through over there, everybody was pretty much like brothers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I ask because I want to know what you experienced, because different people have to say different things. Yeah.
No,
Okay.
I don't recall seeing any of that, but it's very possible it happened.
Yeah. All right.
Unfortunately.
So you kind of get through all of that, and now how did they get you back to the States?
We flew out of Da Nang. I think going home we flew out of Da Nang from Camp Eagle,
Mm-hmm.
Evans to Eagle to Camp Da Nang. Flew out of Da Nang and back into McCord.
Okay.
We came home a different way. We stopped. I think coming home we refueled in Guam.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember going into PX in Guam. Liquor was real cheap, and they said, "Hey, anybody's allowed to take a gallon of liquor back stateside." And we went into PX, and I says, "Oh, this is pretty cool, So I picked up a fifth of, I think I had a fifth of gin, a fifth of bourbon, a fifth of rye. But they had a pack. You could put 5 bottles in a package, and there was no tax on it. So it was. I came home with a whole gallon of liquor. The flight home, I believe they only refueled in Guam, and then we landed in McCord.
Okay.
2 o'clock in the morning in McCord, and they're like, "Can we just get a shuttle over to Seattle? I want to go back to New Jersey." And they're like, "No. You have to go back to Fort Lewis.
Mm-hmm.
You have to go back to Fort Lewis and get Class A's." I think we were flying in fatigues.
Mm-hmm.
We were flying in fatigues, and they said, "Nope, you're going back, and you have to get brand new Class A's for your flight home, and also a steak meal. Everybody gets a steak meal before you leave McCord." So here they got us into it. Was a nice steak meal, but 2-3 o'clock in the morning, who wants to see the steak meal? Bacon and eggs would have been fine. Or skip all that. Just get me to the Seattle airport so I can get a flight to New Jersey. But yeah, we got brand new Class A's. We got a steak meal. By then the sun's come. I think by the time we got on a bus to go to the Seattle airport, the sun was coming up.
Now, did you see any protesters in the airports?
I don't remember any. I know a lot of guys I talked to later on did.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of them were spit on. I mean, we're a bunch of draftees. We didn't volunteer for this.
Okay. And so the flight was just perfectly normal civilian flight.
You know a really good thing after the Iraqi War. I think and I believe the Vietnam veterans had a lot to do with this. After the Iraqi War, the veterans said, we're not going to see another batch of guys come home and get spit on or yelled at or anything like that. And honestly, in the last 20 years, I've had more people come up and shake my hand and thank you for your service.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a lot of that started with the Gulf War period. In the 90s,
You appreciate that.
Yeah. All right. So now you get back home. So you just go back to work at that point?
No. I had orders. I still had 6 months to do.
Oh, okay.
I still had a 6 months obligation, so I got 30 days leave, and I had to report to Fort Riley, Kansas.
Okay.
So I land at the airport. I land at the airport at Fort Riley, and I bump into Jim Billingsley. After Pete went home, Jim Billingsley became our company clerk for Charlie Company. And Jim Billingsley, I met him at the airport, and he asked me what, I told him what company I was going to. And he was in I think he was in the same battalion, but a different company.
Mm-hmm.
So he said, look, my wife Carol, my wife, his wife and daughter, Carol and his daughter, Lisa came out to live with him. He says, I already got an apartment for him in town. He says, why don't you have Linda come out? Have Linda come out, because I got married home on leave. He says, can Linda come out and we'll get an apartment, we'll find an apartment for you off base. So I called Linda up. At that point, I still had like 5 or 6 days leave left. I called Linda up, and Linda cleared it with her. Linda's boss says, yeah, sure, you're a newlywed, yeah. Go out to Kansas for a while, and it's only 6 or 7 months.
Mm-hmm.
Your job will be here when you get back. He says I can hire a temp or something for that time. So Linda came out. I got an apartment off base, and we only had to make formation in the morning, and then at 5 o'clock reveille in the afternoon, Jim and I would go back to our. Well, Jim was in a different company, but I could go back home, and Linda and I'd spend the evening together and the weekends together.
Okay.
Unless I had guard duty, and a lot of times Linda would starch my fatigues and spit shine my boots for me, and I was able to make several times make colonel's orderly, or there was an extra spare guy supernumeral, and then you didn't have to pull guard duty. You actually had the night off.
Mm-hmm.
Linda didn't like staying by herself in an apartment in Junction City, Kansas, so she got me off of guard duty quite a few times.
Okay. Now, did you have any actual duties to perform during the day?
Mostly, yes. Yeah, because that was, the 1st Division came back home,
Mm-hmm.
so we were all placed with the 1st Division, 24th Infantry of the 1st Division at Fort Riley. And they'd have us in the motor pool every day. But what was really comical, it was a mechanized unit. So here's a whole parking lot, here's a whole motor pool filled with APCs, and about less than 1/3 of them ran. So we would go over to the motor pool in the morning, and they're like, see if you can get this one running over here. We'd scavenge parts from the other ones. We'd scavenge parts, we'd get another one running. First we'd look through the few parts in stock. Sometimes you'd find a new part in stock, but very few. I mean, it was the end of war. It was the end of the Vietnam was winding down, and I guess there wasn't a lot of money for spare parts for equipment. Just like the military is today. They say the military is under strength today, about almost back to 1970 times. But anyway, yeah, we spent a lot of time in. If we weren't working on the tracks in the motor pool, we had training. We bivouacked a couple times. A couple times we took the 4 or 5 tracks that ran. We would go out and bivouac at nighttime. Very cold. That was middle of winter out there on the prairie. And even the times I had guard duty, I remember walking guard duty around the motor pool. You'd have 2 hours on, 4 hours off, but we would put on every piece of clothing the military gave us, plus take the wool blanket off your bed and wrap up with that, and walk around the motor pool for 2 hours when it was 10 degrees outside and a 30-mile-an-hour wind coming off the prairie.
All right.
With a baseball bat.
Now, as your enlistment's coming to an end, does the military make any effort to encourage you to stay, or are they just downsizing?
Oh yes, absolutely, absolutely. My last month, I had to endure about 5 or 6 re-up talks. Stay with us. You're doing a good job. My final week at Fort Riley, me and another guy got called before the NCO review board, and they gave us E5. I actually made E5 while I was still in active duty.
Mm-hmm.
I went home a buck sergeant. And because I was an NCO, they paid for me. They paid for my fuel and stuff going home.
Mm-hmm.
But it was an adventure.
All right. So do you go back to your old job when you come back out, or you start a new one?
I did. I worked for Lockheed Electronics at the time, and they took me back. And I had a good friend at Lockheed. He was in the 101st Airborne, but he was in during the late 50s, late 50s, or maybe late 50s, early 60s, well before Vietnam.
Right.
Yeah, I got my old job back, and that went well for 2 or 3 years, and then I think we went into a recession. I left Lockheed, went to another machine shop. I was in 2 or 3 machine shops before I got the job with Johnson & Johnson. Then I finally had 20 some years with almost 24 years with Johnson & Johnson.
Okay. And did you have any issues readjusting to civilian life?
Yeah, I'll tell you what, I was a smoker. I smoked, until I was 40 years old, I smoked cigarettes. And I would light a cigarette. I'd light a cigarette, and if it was nighttime, I'd sit there and cup it in my hand. And people would ask me, why do you smoke like that? And I'm like, oh, so the enemy doesn't see the lit ash, doesn't see the ash glowing. Don't you know that?
Because you would smoke cigarettes in the field.
Yeah.
You just were not smoking other things.
Yeah. And you pick up that habit. That's one Army habit. Yeah, if it was dark outside, I would smoke that cigarette and cup it in my hand. Some things. Yeah, fortunately, yeah, my wife and I gave the cigarettes up when we turned 40.
Mm-hmm. All right. And then, I mean, did you have any other issues or things that qualified as PTSD or anything like that?
You know what? After I met with Steve Stanley, not Steve Stanley, Steve Manthoy.
Mm-hmm.
When Steve sent me with the letter with my picture circled, I called him up and had a nice conversation with him, and he says, "Hey, next summer," he goes, "I got a week's. I don't know if he was on vacation, but he said Bob Steve Stanley's cousin, who was also named Steve Stanley, was coming out to visit, and he said he'd like to meet you and Bob Tarbuck, guys that served with his uncle." And so Steve had us all out at his place, and that's the first time I was reunited with Steve and Bob Tarbuck.
Mm-hmm.
And it was nice. It was nice getting acquainted with them. And like I said, even before I read Keith Nolan's book, I had all this out of my mind already.
Mm-hmm.
Once I got talking to those guys and going to reunions, I'll tell you what happened in 2001. Even the late 90s, Johnson & Johnson started moving all their manufacturing offshore. So the writing was on the wall that our jobs were coming to an end. And I was with, it was the week of 9/11, 2001, the week of 9/11. I got laid off from Johnson & Johnson after 24 years. And I had to look for a job. I was unemployed, looking for a job, and my hearing was terrible. I lost most of my hearing on 9/02,
Mm-hmm.
and so losing my job with J&J, I went and saw the veteran service officer in Somerville, and I says, "Would it be possible for the VA to get me a set of hearing aids?" I says, "I have to go on job interviews, and a lot of times with Johnson & Johnson, my bosses would talk louder, or they would give me blueprints and show me what parts they wanted made, changes on equipment. And then to go on a job interview, I told the veteran service officer, "Could you get me hearing aids?" And he says, "Well, you got to contact a couple of the guys you served with, and they have to be witnesses for you and write letters." He says, however, he goes, "What was your MOS?" And I says, 11 B40. And he goes, He goes, "I can give you 10% for post-traumatic stress right now."
Mm-hmm.
And I says, "Well, I don't know. So that's not going to help me going on a job interview. I don't." He goes, "No," but he goes, "They'll cut you a check for $104 every month." And I says, "Well, that's super. That's great. That'll pay for the groceries."
Yeah.
So that was my first contact with the VA. I got 100% for stress. And then I finally, Steve and Tarbuck, I think it was Steve and Tarbuck, wrote letters, and I took them to the VA,
Yeah.
and I got hearing aids. I got 30% for hearing aids, so now I'm 40%. And then somebody at the VA says, "You should really talk to the counselors for post-traumatic stress." And I showed one of them Keith Nolan's book, and they read a couple pages in Keith Nolan's book, and they said, I guess I knew I had it, I tear up talking about a lot of this stuff, and anyway, working with the VA and everything, I got up to 50% for post-traumatic stress and 30% for my ears, and they ended up giving me 100% disability.
Yeah. So, if you want to kind of look back now a little bit on your time in the service, I mean, overall, how do you think that affected you, or what did you learn from it?
it gives you a big appreciation for a lot of the stuff, you take for granted. Sleeping in a dry bed, having 3 good meals a day. You learn to appreciate stuff that you don't have, or stuff that you could lose real easily.
All right. And then just to close out here, just think back a little bit to the time that you spent in Vietnam. Are there other particular memories you've got that are things that you haven't talked about here yet?
You know, I can remember flying out a couple times when we would do CAs out to the Shaw Valley and stuff. It's a real beautiful country. I mean, I've seen pristine streams and rivers and waterfalls. One time we flew past this water. It must have been like a 200 or 300 foot waterfall on the side of a mountain, and it's a really, really beautiful country. And I can understand. Bob Smoker, I believe, has been back 7 or 8 times already, and I can understand why. He hooked up with one of the Chuhoy scouts, and Bob's been taking a lot of the veterans back there. Myself, I don't need to see it again, but I'll tell you, my 2 granddaughters went to Cambodia earlier this year,
Wow.
and through their church, they have they're helping the people out in Cambodia. They have missionaries over there. So my granddaughters are 14 to 16 years old, and they volunteered to go over there and help out building this church. And I think one day they mixed up concrete and they were pouring sidewalks and stuff. But my granddaughters loved it because they got to meet a lot of Cambodian kids their own age, and. My granddaughters were already saying, hey, if the church does this again next year, we want to go back to Cambodia. They really enjoyed the trip. But I was scared. When I first heard they're going to Cambodia, I'm like, oh my goodness, no. I told my daughter, no, you can't let them go over there. And my daughter's like, no, it's perfectly safe. The church has a missionary over there now. So things have changed a lot in 50 years.
The world has changed.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you very much for taking the time to do this today.
Thank you, Jim. I appreciate it. And again, I just want to see this all accurate. When I'm going, all the history should be accurate for everybody.
Well, we're going to do our best to do
Yeah.
that.